Welcome to the Reads with Rosa podcast. This week, I talk with Rev. Brian Kolia, an ordained minister in the Efakasa Church and a lecturer at Malua Theological College in Samoa. He is currently a PhD candidate for Hebrew Bible at the University of Divinity in Melbourne, Australia. Brian shares with us his story growing up as a Samoan in the Australian diasporic community, addresses questions regarding the importance of culture and church, as well as his journey as an academic scholar and spiritual leader in the Efakasa Church community. Welcome to the space where creatives have aligned a positive and intellectual collab of open minds for sharing and learning from one another. It's a vibe. ReadswithRosa podcast on the mic. Subscribe, educator spitting bars. I guess you didn't know. Multifaceted and humble, taking off life goals. The classroom is my comfort zone where I plant and sow seeds of knowledge, compassion, empathy, and hope. Reading is the key to unlocking your potential. Countless benefits, including cognitive and mental. Regardless of the genre, books are highly influential. Go get yours, I'll get mine. Make you strive, monumental. Come rock with me and get down to this new jam. Between my friends, I had a very simple plan: educate the masses through books and life lessons. It's a grand slam. I'm out. Welcome to the show, Brian. It is such an honor, bro. It's such an honor to have someone of your caliber on the podcast. The man. Thank you so much for being here, bro. How are you?
Yeah, good, sis. Good to see you. No, it's my pleasure and my absolute honor, to be part of your wonderful podcast. I've heard so many good things about it. So yeah, I'm actually the one that's honored.
I noticed your bright purple shirt.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not hating. Storm's my second team. Just saying.
Number one on the ladder. Yeah, just this year. So. But if we don't end up back to back, you can delete this episode.
I'm not even arguing with you. I mean, I'm just like, hey, Melbourne Storm, create your own letter over there. You guys are like out of this world, seriously. So for our audience members, I mean, some people may be familiar with you, but I'm sure a lot of people are like, who is this guy? So Brian, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Just who is Brian Kolia?
Yeah, I don't normally talk about myself, so that's a really tough question to ask first up. But yeah, my name's Brian Kolia. I'm currently serving as a lecturer at Malua Theological College, but I'm on staff development at the moment, doing my PhD in Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. At the University of Divinity in Melbourne, part of the Whitley College here in Melbourne as well. And I'm being supervised by some brilliant scholars in their own right, Professor Mark Brett of Whitley College and independent Tongan scholar Sione Havea. So I'm currently here looking to complete this year. And then, if all goes well, then I'm heading back to Malua to teach again. Before that, I was brought up in Sydney. I was born and raised, but been moving to a number of places over the years. When my own parents went to Malua as well, followed them, spent a couple of years there. I guess that's where I sort of developed my my understanding and knowledge of cultural norms and the language. And then, when we came back, when my parents got called to Campbelltown in Sydney, sort of continued my journey there. I'm a second generation Australian-born Samoan as well. So, been existing in between spaces. And then ever since then, I married a woman from Wainuiamata in Aotearoa, and we have a son, 9 years old, and we have a wonderful young family at the moment, but we've been migrating to different places over the years. We haven't really stayed in one place for a very long time. We spent 4 years in Malua, then went to Fiji, then went back to Malua, and now we're here in Australia. So hopefully this next move, God willing, back to Samoa, it'll be more permanent. But this journey is sort of like, the wind currents in the ocean. We just sort of go with the flow, and wherever it takes us, we'll just ride the waves.
Amen.
A bit about me.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there's so many layers to who you are. Like you said, you've lived in many places. So let's just go right back to the beginning. You were born and raised in Australia, Sydney. I mean, what was it like for you growing up as a Pacific Islander or as a Samoan in Sydney, Australia? Like when you were growing up, were you seeing a lot of Pacific Islanders around you? Were there a lot of Samoans in your area? Because, your parents are also, I guess you could say, they are pioneers of the FKSA Church, Congregational Christian Church, Samoa in Australia. Like what was that like for you growing up, like before going away to Malua, before studies and all of that?
So I didn't quite know like who I was culturally speaking until when I went with my parents to Malua, because before that I was born in Sydney, but we spent a number of years here in Melbourne. And so, back in those days, in the 80s, the Samoan community in Melbourne wasn't that big. It was like, being in an FKSA church, there was only like 3 churches at the time, whereas now I think there's 20 or more. So, it was. I grew up in Sydney. When we returned back from Samoa after my parents did their studies, and it still was, the Samoan community in Sydney during the 90s was still very small. There wasn't a big growth of Samoans until that period. So when I went to school, I went to a Catholic school. There was only like a handful of us Samoans and Tongans, some Papua New Guinean kids as well. And there weren't many of us. And then when I went on to uni, it was the same story. It was rare to see a brown face. It was mostly people of European or Asian or Indian background. To see another Samoan or another Tongan at university back in those days was pretty rare. Growing up in Sydney, that was it was difficult in that sense because, you always find it easy to work and to sort of mingle with your fellow people, because you can draw from them, you draw strength from them because they went through similar experiences. They know the struggle existing as migrants in Australia. However, wasn't able to draw much on that at the time. So it was you felt lonely as a result. So it's great to see that now there's a lot of Samoans in Sydney, and they're going on to university and succeeding. That's not to say that university is the only measure of success. I mean, people succeed in a number of ways, and a number of options are available for kids growing up in Sydney to make a living. But to see other Samoans in university was in these times is really great, and to see them as well to achieve success that they are. But back in the 80s and the 90s, it was because the mass migration of Samoans didn't occur until like the 70s and the 80s towards Sydney and the rest of Australia. It was growing up as a Samoan, you felt sort of lonely and distanced.
Yeah, because you mentioned that it wasn't until you went to Malua, to theological college with your parents, when they were doing their studies, you mentioned culture there. I mean, was that a culture shock for you going to Samoa? Was that like your actual first time, or had you kind of traveled back and forth as a youngster with mum and dad?
So,
or with, just like family trips and stuff? Like, was there any exposure to Samoa prior to going to Malua?
I think what Malua did, when my parents were in Malua, what that experience did was it sort of gave me a quick learning curve. So what I might have taken maybe 5, 6, 7, or up to 10 years to learn something. Now we had this crash course within 4 years to try and get everything. I mean, well, it wasn't my aim to try and get everything, but I did get everything within that what I learned at that stage within 4 years. So it was because everything, the culture was around you. And back in Malua in the 90s, there weren't that many outsiders. There weren't that many New Zealand-born or New Zealand-raised students, and the families as well. So you were forced to speak Samoan. So I guess that's why it was a crash course, because you had to absorb everything really quickly. Otherwise, how are you going to communicate? My sister, the one after me, she experienced a bit of difficulty in our second year there because, she quickly lost her English, and her Samoan wasn't all that great. So we didn't know what language she was trying to communicate in. And so, that's the difficulty of coming from overseas to start back to the homeland. You had to pick up things quicker, and that way you can sort of, and because of that, you picked up the rest of the sort of the basics of the culture while you were growing up, and that proved really handy when we came back to Sydney, and helping my parents as we were growing up in Ngaluenga in that church. The culture was really helpful because here in the diaspora, the church is really critical platform for our culture to grow, because a lot of the culture is being practiced within the church, and when you go to church, you learn the culture pretty easily. So I was able to use some of that stuff that I learned in Samoa in the church in order to sort of help my parents while we were serving.
What was it like for you growing up? I mean, then coming back and your parents serving, then you were a minister's son, right? You weren't just that's Brian who went away and now he's back. I mean, you had a role to play. I'm assuming you were a youth leader and played many different roles in your church. Like, what was, we hear stories of ministers' kids, Faith Al's kids, and just the intense pressure and expectations on them. Did you at any time go through those experiences, or were you just taken in stride? Do it. It's part of the Ngaluenga.
No, it was definitely had its pressures, and I sort of feel for a lot of the ministers' kids. The experience they go through, because it's different for a lot of people. We go through the same experience, but the way we deal with it is different. Some kids, they struggle with the attention that it receives. Some kids feel that they're being forced to do a lot of the duties that's required, and I understand that. I get it. Being a minister's son as well. The way that I had dealt with it is, I had my younger siblings, and it was difficult for them, but I felt that I had to sort of be the one that had to be strong for them, and so I sort of responded in a way that reflected my love for my parents. So when my parents needed someone to sort of stand firm with them and to help them with all the duties and the pressures that they went through, I sort of took it upon myself to be the strong one, and I did it out of my love for my parents. That was first and foremost. So, while my sisters had their own ideas about being a minister's kid, for me, that was my sort of decision that I made, was to sort of took it upon myself to ease the load for my parents because of my love for them. I still remember this one time I was playing club footy, and I was getting ready to go on the field, and my phone rang, and it was my dad telling me, stop your well, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm about to get on the field. And he said, oh, well, come home now. We got buses on. We got quiet. So I pulled out of the match. I said, Coach, I got to go. There's an emergency at home. And the coach wasn't too happy, but little did he know that the emergency was quiet. It's some of the sacrifices that I sort of made for my parents, but knowing all too well that they would have done the same for me. That was my sort of motivation for being a minister's kid. But like I said, that's my experience. It's my way of dealing with it. Every kid's different, and everyone has a right to express and feel the way that they do in their own experiences as kids. So that was my one.
What did young Brian want to be? Like, what were your dreams as a youngster coming through school? Like, did you want to be a fireman? Did you want to be a footy player? Because then you went to Malua. We'll get to that. But I mean, young Brian, what were you dreaming about? Like, what careers did you have in mind, if at all?
Young Brian wanted to be a lot of things. When I was growing up in Malua as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, I really took an interest in what my dad was doing. I really took an interest in it. Living the life as a kid in Malua, I saw what he was doing, and I really felt I wanted to be a part of this. But I was only seeing the good things. I wasn't seeing all the other stuff that would have given my dad the pressure and headaches, things that I didn't discover until I became Malua myself. But at the time, I was seeing him do all these things. So I had that dream, from that young age, that I think Malua was my future, But, as I was growing up in Sydney, you start to experience a lot of other stuff, and, I dreamed one day that I wanted to play for the Melbourne Storm.
Are you sure it wasn't the Brisbane Broncos? I mean, no, okay. Just checking.
Hey, but I'd rather play for the Broncos than the Sydney Roosters. So
don't get me started. Don't get me started now.
It's kind of weird because people might be listening thinking, "Oh, shouldn't he go for the Roosters?" Because but no. I have a really close affinity with Melbourne, having gone to school here. Spent a lot of my childhood here in Melbourne, so I've always been attached to Melbourne. So when the team came out in '98, when they first established, I automatically switched team because I was going for the Raiders before that.
Why?
I don't know. It was just a team that at the time, when you're growing up in Melbourne, it's AFL's the sport. So I used to follow AFL, and back then I was a Essendon Bombers fan. For those who are familiar with AFL, I didn't realize rugby until I moved to Samoa, and then later on, growing up in Sydney. But anyway, back to that. I went to uni, and I wanted to be an accountant, and I ended up an accountant. I don't even know if I wanted to be an accountant, but that was I was sort of good at maths, and I thought,
Okay.
maybe I should do something associated with maths, and I thought accountant was a natural fit. My dad's younger brother who was an accountant, and I thought, maybe this is in my blood. So yeah, I did a lot of that. I went to uni. I did my bachelor in commerce, majored in accounting, and then I continued on with my master's in accounting. And then I was working for 4 years as a junior accountant, and I absolutely hated it. I just thought, man, why am I doing this? And I think that's the time I thought, nah, I'm going to tell my dad I'm going to go sort it. Wanted to be, wanted to go to Malua, and I felt that was the time. My dad wasn't too happy with the choice, weirdly enough.
Really? I mean, I was going to say, like, was there the expectation as the son, but then for you just mentioned he wasn't. That's a surprise.
No, well, he I guess it wasn't that he was disappointed in my decision, but it was just, I've been such a help around the house. I was working and providing financial support as well. And I think my dad, without calling him selfish, was, he was just thinking about what my contributions to the family, and felt, I want this guy to go, type of mentality, which is understandable. But when he saw that I was committed to doing this, then he felt, I don't want to get in this. He basically told me, I don't want to get in the Lord's way. If that's the Lord calling you, then you better go. So I had to make sure I passed the exam.
Right.
So it was a bit of a tough time having to leave my parents and go to Malua. But it all worked out in the end.
Okay, so what are some misconceptions that people have about Malua students? I'm sure you have a long list. I don't know. Was there a long list?
I think the number one misconception that I think people have about Malua students is they think that they're not human. They're humans as well. They make mistakes. They fall into temptation. So this idea that they're not error prone is sort of a fallacy. So I think that's the one misconception. At the same time, I think this image that we sort of uphold doesn't help. The perfect schoolboy haircut, and then the whites and all that sort of stuff. When we put that on, like sometimes when I put it on, I feel like I'm an obnoxious person. Like, I have my own beliefs about what we wear and all that sort of stuff, but I think that sort of image, it doesn't help with this misconception that people might have that we're not human, we don't make mistakes. So there's a lot of pressure on us to act a certain way, to uphold the image, because it's not just ourselves we're representing the college, and therefore we're representing the church. So, I mean, I think if people can sort of understand that we're human as well, it'll make our lives a little bit easier. At the same time, I think as students, we need to sort of understand also that we are human. That even though we're trying to uphold an image and a reputation, to also understand that being human means that we are prone to make mistakes, and the best way to learn is by the mistakes we make. And in order for us to progress, we progress through learning and understanding. And that's why mistakes are important. And therefore, to learn from our mistakes is crucial in the ministry. So, yeah, I think that would be sort of one of the main misconceptions about us. I think another misconception is that, which is weird, is that people probably think we can sing. As a choir, yes. But
I thought you were a star singer, bro.
Nah. I tried, but then I came to the sad conclusion that no, I'll never make a life in singing. Just there's only a few of us that are blessed with that talent, like the Usolani. The rest of us, I think, we're just content at being choir singers. So yeah, as a choir, we can be okay, but yeah, individually, no.
Malua, they have the different year levels, right? So, year 1, and each year level plays an important role within the school, right? Like what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I don't want to say hierarchy.
Secrets, are we?
I don't want to say it's just like.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Like, I don't want to be like, because that hierarchy that or the different, like, how important is that in terms of the running of the school, right? Because every year plays an important part in that. Like for you going through that, what are your thoughts on that, or what was it like for you in your experiences, right? Everyone has a different experience, but
yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think we need to understand first that Malua is a college that's been around for so many years. They've been around since 1844. So they've always had a system in place, and a system that works and functions. Not every system is perfect. Every system has its flaws and things that can make it better. But, for the big part, or for the most part, the system at Malua works because, the college is under the guidance of the board, and the board is made up of elders in particular. So they have a certain expectation of what students, their behavior and the type of example they're meant to set. And it's very reflective of what's going on also within the churches, within the dioceses, to use Samoan terms, the Pōlenga and the Matanga Luenga. So, you have to know your place when you start at the college, and that's the reality. I mean, you're not going to come in and you start making decisions and you start ordering other people around. I mean, there's a learning process. So, we follow that Samoan proverb, e au le tau ola, e au le whangota. So there's a process in place that you're supposed to follow. You're supposed to observe and learn from others. And then when your time comes as a fourth year student, then you've absorbed all those lessons as valuable lessons that when you become leaders of the college, you'll sort of know how to lead and how to maintain the expectations that the elders have for us. And, all that is valuable when you go on into the ministry and serve, that you also sort of use those same lessons that you've been taught in the college, in the Pōlenga and the Matanga Luenga. So, the term hierarchy.
I mean, that's also, I don't know if that's the correct term, but I also understand what you're saying. Like I totally get that. In time, you will get to that fourth year, right? And then, I get that. But I was just thinking from an outsider's perspective, like someone who wouldn't know that, like what would, that might be something that they would ask, like why have those different year levels? Why is the third year, people say that's the hardest, and then eventually you get to the leadership in the fourth year. So I was just
well, for me, my favorite year was my first year. Even though we were like the bum boys of the college, um, well, I enjoyed that experience, because everything was new, and for me as a sort of curious person, I wanted to know what this and that, so that whole newness for me in that first year was, what made it a really great experience. Second year, you start to know how things run, and then you just sort of like, yeah, okay. Then third year, the sort of the tensions go up again, because now, I mean, the third years are traditionally called lango lango, and a lot of the times when people explain what lango means, they refer to the image of the umu, and with the umu, you have the langolangos, which sort of hold the rocks together as they're being cooked up. So they're the ones that are sort of holding everything together. And langolango also means support. So when it comes to all the fe'aus of the college, whether it's hosting or whatever, it's the third year students that have to do the majority of that work, whether it's preparing the food, whether it's serving. It's always, if you were to ever go to a Malua function, those students and their wives who are sort of serving you, more than likely they're the third year class. So the tension goes up there, because you know that you've got all these things that you need to attend to. And then when you get to fourth year, it's sort of a fitting way to sort of that it comes after that third year, because now you can relax, and then you've earned your right, to the sort of the mantle of being fourth year. But it has its own challenges as well. You got to be on your best behavior as a fourth year, because now you're not looking over your shoulders to the other students above you. Now you're looking over your shoulder to the teachers and the principals. So it's a whole new level of watching over your shoulder. But those are those 4 years were some of the best years of my life, and made some really valuable and friendships that that will be lifelong. And a lot of them, well, all of them, they're going to be my brothers for life. So I call upon them, they call upon me. That's how it is. Never did I think that I'd be sort of best mates with some guy from South Auckland.
What's wrong with South Auckland? Up to, man. Everyone's for you now. What do you say that for?
One of my best mates is from South Auckland, and now he's looking after the church there. And one of my other really good mates is in America. Well, two of them, one's passed away recently. So I've got all these fantastic brothers from all over the shop, and it's been a privilege, those 4 years in the college.
How important is the role of the whaletua, at Malua, the role of, or even the role of women in the ministry, and the minister's wife, like, not many people talk about it. I haven't heard of, the role of women, of the whaletua, the minister's partner and wife. I don't really hear about them, but how important is their support and work within the ministry?
They're paramount. It's paramount. They're paramount. They're really important. Without the whaletua, we can't do our job. It's a partnership. It's a genuine partnership, not just in life, but in the way we serve in the ministry. I can't say enough how important my wife is, in supporting and in taking the load off myself when I'm working. She exhibits a lot of leadership characteristics as well that are important, and I rely on her for a lot of things. you know, at times when I feel down, you know, I just turn to my wife, and she helps me get me out of the rut that I'm in. And you know, that's on an emotional level, and a psychological level, and a spiritual level. But also on a practical level, they, you know, some of the programs that the Whaletoas go through and they do at Malua is essential in providing that other element of our ministry. I think we take for granted when we walk into the Whale Whiwhiao and it looks all nice and flash. When we walk into the Whalesa and it looks really good, I think we take that for granted. And you know, there's work that behind the scenes that's been done. That you know, it's their fantastic creativity and artistry, and the sweat and effort that they put into producing, you know, that beautiful work. You know, only a Whaletua can do that to the level that we see and the beauty that we see it. You know, if we were to try to do it, you know, probably a lot of people might go mumu and say, "Oh, stink." Yeah, man, there are special talents that they have that we don't have, and you know, I must acknowledge that. You know, and it's not just the practical stuff as well. You know, they are very Whaletoas are very smart. A lot of Whaletoas have degrees.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask, actually, that was my next question was, you know, a lot of them do go into the ministry with degrees and training in certain areas. As a teacher, as a lecturer, sorry, are there opportunities for, you know, Whaletua to maybe present papers in specific areas, or is it more, again, the supporting from behind the scenes? Like, has that, I don't really know. It's just something I've always wondered about. You know.
You know, sadly, you know, those opportunities for Whaletuas is rare at the moment. And I would like for that to sort of increase. You know, they do presentations, but mostly in a Whaletua context, or but you know, we have mafutanga whiwhiao, we have tele. Those are other opportunities that teachers get to present. But yeah, it would be nice for Whaletuas to present as well, and to present the knowledge and wisdom that they have. Because, like I said, you know, Whaletuas there are a lot of very wise and intelligent Whaletua who, you know, I would love to hear them present papers and present the work that they do. But at the moment, you know, we're still very much in a traditional conservative context that we haven't seen that, but I would love to see that emerge in the near future.
Do you see that happening anytime soon? What would it take for that to happen realistically? When we think about and I'm not, I don't want you to get in trouble.
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of awkward, you know, being here at institutions like, you know, the University of Divinity, where, you know, it's a multi-faith, multi-church, multi-denominational context, and you see the wonderful work they put in place in a lot of these churches, whether it's the Uniting, the Anglican, or Baptist. You know, the wonderful work they put into ensuring that women fulfilling and filling up a lot of leadership roles in the church, and, you know, ensuring that they have the same opportunities that are presented to men and other genders. It's so refreshing to see that, knowing all too well that our denomination is, you know, we're still sort of existing in a time where women ordination is still not on the cards, and the opportunities for women in leadership are very rare. So, you know, realistically speaking, There isn't much opportunity at the moment, but I would love to see our ecclesia sort of progress beyond those archaic standards, because the church is moving forward. It's growing. It's progressing, and I'd hate to see us being left in in the dark and left behind. So in order for us to progress as a church, we need to sort of mirror what's going on around the world. Women and other genders being acknowledged and filling up all these important leadership roles. Why can't we do that as a church? And we sort of tend to hear all these different excuses of why women can't be whiwhiao and that type of thing. I have my reservations about that, and and I feel that as a church we need to ordain women. We need to have women in leadership roles and opportunity in equal opportunities for women and other genders in our church. So that's my dream. But realistically speaking, as you said, I don't see that happening in the immediate future, but I would love to see that happen.
I mean, a lot of you, there are a lot of students, like, teachers who go and study and do PhD studies overseas. And I imagine you bring back so much wealth and knowledge, coming back into the college. How is it that obviously that knowledge is shared through lectures, but do you, as teachers at that level, do you get to speak in spaces or in forums with the leaders of the churches, with the leaders of our ecclesia? I mean, is there a space for that to happen, or am I just like imagining and dreaming about things that don't really happen?
Well, let me say that our influence is sort of restricted to the classroom, as you're saying. So, that small amount of opportunity that we can exert our influence, if we can try and mold students to have a more progressive mindset, and to sort of have this understanding that there are groups that are being marginalized, that there are groups that are dominant in the discourse, and to make them aware of that and to acknowledge that and to sort of find ways of trying to deal with those different groups. In actual fact, that I reckon that can sort of be our pivotal moment. And in essence, what we're trying to do is also to try and decolonize their mindsets from the colonial tendencies that reading the Bible, doing theology, all that type of thing. We still very much in our conservative ways approach it from a very colonial mindset, and these are the legacies of all those years ago, from the missionaries right down to all the different lecturers and teachers. There are these colonial tendencies and legacies that have been passed on from generation to generation. So if we can exert our influence as lecturers to try and counter that and to decolonize those mindsets, I think that would be helpful for our students. And then hopefully with a view that those students with that progressive mindset, when they become toeina, maybe that they can sort of bring about change in our church. So that's our small window of opportunity that we can try and exert that influence.
I like that. That is very cool. While we're on that, this is just a general question, and it's not really our church. It doesn't have to be our church. But do you think, what are your thoughts on this idea that it's like the church has a responsibility to speak on, to speak out about racial injustices and advocate for marginalized communities, right? And it doesn't have to be our church, like churches in general. This is actually something that I discussed in social justice class with my grade 11 students last year. And there were just so many different opinions, you know, for teenagers, right? Some were saying, no, it's not the responsibility of the church, you know, and it was really interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
No, we definitely have a responsibility. Whether we're fulfilling that responsibility is another question. But, you know, in the words of Walter Linney, who was the Prime Minister for Vanuatu, he said that, you know, if West Papua is not free, then we're not free. And all of us are not free. So we're not all free unless West Papua is free. And what Walter Linney is talking about there is the responsibility of us as Pacific neighbors to acknowledge and also to stand by the injustices that are happening to our fellow neighbors. So us as Samoans, you know, there's a lot of injustices that are going around, not just within our own context, but also surrounding. And we can't stand idle to the injustices that are happening in West Papua, you know, because they're our neighbors, they're our brothers and sisters in the Pacific. We share the moana with them, you know, so we're connected through the moana with them. So for us to be idle on that, it's a lack of responsibility on our behalf. And it's not just us, you know, many of the churches are silent on the freedom of West Papua. They prefer not to touch it and you know, and to be silent on those matters. But, you know, if you choose to be silent on matters, then you're only enabling the oppressor, because the oppressor, they are reliant on that silence. So when we are silent, we are enabling and we are just assisting the oppressor. So, you know, there are also the issues of climate change and climate justice. You know, we can't be ignorant of that fact either, because, you know, our neighbors in Kiribati, Tuvalu, Tokelau, Marshall Islands, they're losing inches of land by the day due to rising sea levels. And so we got to check our privilege. You know, we need to check our privilege in that. You know, it might not be happening at the same rate to Samoa and Fiji and Tonga, but it's happening to our very close by neighbors. So on matters of social and on climate justice, we also need to be advocates for climate justice. And then, you know, social justice as well, whether it's racial, gender justice. Again, we need to sort of stand with the marginalized on those issues. A lot of the time we get told by the secular world to stay in your lane, you know, don't deal with politics, it's not your area. But in matters of justice and matters of discrimination and marginalization, we can't stand idle as a church. We need to side with the marginalized, and we must always side with the marginalized, because the very example of that was Jesus. If you read through the Gospels, Jesus always sided with the marginalized. And he spent a lot of time with social outcasts, marginalized members of society. You know, Jesus never sat with the rich and drank wine with them. Jesus was always, you know, visiting the poor, the sick. That's who Jesus took interest in. So for us, we need to reflect that same initiative that Jesus had. And like I said, when it comes to matters of justice and discrimination and you know, racial and social justice, you know, we need to side with the marginalized. We need to stand firm with them in their fight against injustices.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Jesus, because I think if there's anything, I learned so much. So for our audience, you know, well, I can't say I'm part because I stopped going, but we
I'm still part.
have a Bible study called Zuma's family, and which is led by our brother B here. I mean, it's just amazing discussions on just many issues, and of course Bible study. And if there's like one thing that I learned so much about was Jesus, and Jesus among all sorts of people, being around many people, Jesus as the radical, Jesus for social, he stands with those who are marginalized, right? And these are things that I would speak about. Like we'll be at Zoomers, and then I'm in religion class or social justice, sharing with my students, because I'm like, what does Jesus look like to you? And they're like, blonde hair, white. And I'm like, really? What does that, so it's so interesting because, I have a grade 6 class, and you ask them, what does Jesus look like? They describe him, and this is who they imagine him to be, because in the books, this is how they show him. And social justice classes would have these discussions on, Jesus fighting for, injustice and the marginalized people. That was from Zoomers, bro. Like, I was so inspired by Zoomers, even though I kind of died out in the end there as it was getting busy for our end of. No, that's no excuse, but bro, I learned so much. Not just about Jesus. I know we talked a little bit about West Papua, but also Free Palestine. I learned just a lot in our discussions about, the people of Israel. That whole discussion, right?
You're right. A lot of Christians are very pro-Israel, and there's nothing wrong with supporting Israel. There's nothing wrong with supporting Israel as long as you're also supporting Palestine. And what I mean by that is that we often take the position of the privileged for on at the cost or at the expense of those that are being oppressed. And this pro-Israel stance tends to do that because they often see Palestine as the enemy or the evil party.
Right.
And I think that a lot of that comes from the way we read the biblical text. Too often we see Israel as the chosen nation who are set apart from everyone else, and then therefore everyone else are just pagans. But if you think about that type of mindset, it's a very pro-colonial mindset, because it's the same mindset that of the colonizers, where they look at the other with contempt. They don't look favorably upon them. And back many centuries ago, the period of colonization, these were what the colonizers were doing. They were just entering lands of other peoples at will, and therefore coming with this understanding that, we are the great, whether it's the British or whoever it is, we are the great British empire. We come to colonize you and to make you into Christians, and for you to lose your language and follow this one English language and one English culture and that type of thing. And that is the position, that is the mindset of the colonizer. So when you're reading the biblical text and you're saying, Israel is the chosen nation, forget about everyone else, that's taking the mindset of the colonizer. But you have to ask yourself the question, well, what about those nations that Israel is conquering, or the nations that Israel is just, walking through on their way to the promised land? What about the promised land? There were people that were already there, and they've chased them off their land. And that, when you read the text and you're aware of that, then it becomes problematic. It's problematic, and if it does become problematic in your reading, then I think your humanity has come forth, because now you're realizing, oh, hang on a minute, there are other humans in the story that we're not accounting for. These are people that have been living on the land. Why shouldn't we empathize with them? A lot of these people, a lot of this Canaanite population, for instance, consists of women, children, animals, who have done nothing wrong. And as a human, you have to empathize with that. You need to acknowledge that these are people that are being sort of being chased off their lands. They're being destroyed. Their homes are being destroyed. Their livelihood is being destroyed. So all those things, when you take that into account in your reading, it can't help but poke at you when you're reading. And if it doesn't poke at you, then you're reading from a position of privilege. So reading the Bible that way, it helps you to understand that there are other parties that are being marginalized that we need to account for. So going back to I'm a big supporter of Free Palestine, and it's because of that. We need to we need to check our privilege in our understanding of the world and acknowledge that these are people these are also native people of the land, who have every right to the lands that they live on. And yet there's all this hostility and war that's going on because of decisions that are being made by people in power that are sort of supporting Israel. Now, like I said, Israel has equal claim to the land, but justices are happening towards the Palestinians more, and we need to acknowledge that. And that's why this pro-Israel position can be a bit problematic for some.
Yeah, I mean, I get so annoyed on social media because, like, recently there was, I mean, it's nothing new, right? There were things that happened in Palestine and, people were getting murdered and stuff, and it was all blown up all over social media. And then there was pro-Israel, and there was this for about 3 or 4 weeks, I think it was just full on. But it's nothing new. Like, Free Palestine has been since 1948 when that treaty was signed, 1948, and it's just like, now it's gone quiet again. Like, social media is like that, and it's just so annoying. And again, like Free West Papua, it's the same thing. People jump on the boat, and then you see those same people going on holiday in Bali. And it's just like in Indonesia, and it's like, come on. Really, like, it's really frustrating. It's frustrating that the New Zealand and Australia government don't do anything. It's frustrating that as Pacific neighbors, we don't do,
Yeah. It all comes down to accountability. And in order to be accountable, we need to check our privilege. We need to check whether we're enabling the oppressing voices or the oppressors. And if we are, then we need to check ourselves. So, as a church, going back to your original question, those are the positions that we should be taking. We should be taking the positions that stand side by side with those in the margins and those that have been victimized. And that's not just on an international level, on a global scale, but it's also on a local scale. Even within our church, women are being marginalized. People of other genders are being marginalized. Children are being marginalized. So, when we make decisions, we need to check our own privileges in those decisions, and who's benefiting and who's being victimized as a result of our decisions. So it exists on all levels, and we need to be accountable for that.
Last year you had a podcast. My brother and I loved it. Were we your only listeners? I'm just kidding. My brother and I loved your podcast. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. We loved your podcast. Like, we were like listening to it. Like, it was awesome, bro. where you were breaking down scriptures, and I know like you're just full on busy. Is there any chance you're going to be bringing back that podcast, maybe even on a monthly, or because it was just so many gems in that podcast, even the few episodes that you recorded, and it was, you know, there was just a lot of substance and just so many gems. We learned a lot. We would talk about it all the time. So
Yeah.
we're fans, in case you didn't realize. Get it together. Hello.
I didn't actually know who was listening until I went back up to Sydney at the end of last year. Was it last year or the year before? Last year, and you know, I was at this Bulinga gathering, and you know, some of the kids from the other churches, they were coming to me, "Hey, Brian, what happened to the podcast? How can you start?" I go, "What? Were you listening to it?" Yeah, I didn't know people were listening to it because you know, I didn't have a sort of measure of who was listening, or I couldn't tell who was listening. So I have every intention of bringing it back. Now, when that is, at the earliest, maybe later this year. At the absolute latest, it'll be most likely next year.
Exciting.
But yeah, for those who are unaware, so it's a podcast named Motunga Afa.
I'm gonna put it in the bio for the video, for the episode, because it's so many gems, fam, audience members. You don't even have to be Samoan. No, seriously.
Well, yeah. I mean, I do it in English for the sake of our, especially our youth that are in in the diaspora, whether it's New Zealand, Australia, or America. And you know, so what I do in that podcast, and normally my podcast episodes go for like maybe 15 minutes max. And what I do is to try and it's basically I'm doing this in the big picture on the I'm trying to assist our whaiwhiaus, because our whaiwhiaus really get maybe 20 at most 30 minutes to try and preach on Sundays. And you would know from our Bible studies that our Bible studies go well over an hour, sometimes into 2 hours. I'm wondering if that's why you stopped coming. Anyway,
right now.
But you can see that we take a long time to try and unpack everything in our studies. So for the poor whaiwhiaus to try and do all that within 30 minutes, like at most, and a lot of whaiwhiaus don't even reach 30. It's more 20 or 15 to 20 minutes. So to do all that within that time, it can be sort of really pressuring for whaiwhiao, because there's a lot of area to cover, a lot of scripture. You got to also, because they also got as ministers, being taught in Malua, we have to talk about the background of the text, all that information in order to assist explaining and exegeting that passage. So there's a lot that goes on, and then not to mention, the application of the sermon, which is to try and relate that to what's happening in our own context. So there's a lot that goes on, and for that, to try and get all that done within 15 to 20 minutes is just, I have so much admiration for whaiwhiaus who have to prepare all this for week in, week out. Now, the way I assist is to try and bridge that gap for our youth, because they're coming in and they don't have that background knowledge and all that sort of stuff of the text. And sometimes when they get, they'll start hearing the background from the whaiwhiao, and then they'll just switch off, and it's not at no fault of the whaiwhiao. It's just because some of that information can be boring. So in that podcast, I try and delve into the background, unpack some of the key themes and terms in the text, so that when the student, when the listener goes and sits on a Sunday, they've got this knowledge beforehand that can assist with them in listening to the whaiwhiao's message. Because I don't really try and do that much application in the podcast because that's the Whiwhiao's job. So, when they go to listen, it's always good to have that pre-existing knowledge in order to sort of bridge that gap and ease your way into the Whiwhiao's launga. And then, I think I've got a lot of positive response from people who said, your podcast really helped me understand the Whiwhiao's message. And for me, that's the key. So moving forward, it was a big issue because, this is part of the reason why I stopped because, as you know, I'm currently doing my PhD and it did take up a lot of time because I tend to stutter a lot as I'm stuttering now. And
I'm not. Stop it.
I couldn't record something without, like that, all that. So I thought the best way to go about it is to write a manuscript and then just read it. And that's what I've been doing on the podcast. So I do my research, get it all into a sort of a flowing format so that I can just read it out. And that was it. And that's why you sort of hardly heard any hardly heard any of those what do you call it? Those arming and oohing and all that sort of stuff. Because of the fact that I've had the manuscript written down and reading from it.
That is so good. So good. We're such big fans of that. You already know that. We told you. It was just, I was engaged from start to finish. And I remember at the time we were, listening to it, because I think it was Lundy. I think he might have seen you tweet or something. He was like, yo, check this out. Then I checked it out. I was like, hooked. But I think what it is like, I wish there was more of that out there. Not saying that everyone should do it, but even just maybe a team of you that can write just something, because like you said, the youth, the younger ones coming through, it's so crucial that we catch them, that they're engaged. Otherwise, like you said, they're sitting in church. Yeah. Like we've all been through that, where you're just sitting there going, what? Like, did I miss the boat? Yeah. Like what?
And there's a language barrier as well that our kids have to deal with. So they're listening to a sermon in Samoan, and the Whiwhiao was talking at a speed that they're talking at a speed that's kids that don't know the language that well, they're going to struggle, right? So that's why the podcast is in English. So the hope. And this is probably a proposal that I want to put to the principal next year and my colleagues and Malua, is to perhaps make this maybe an official Malua podcast. And that way, I've got a lot of other experts on the field, like especially New Testament, because New Testament's not my jam. I love the New Testament, but there are people that know a lot more than me, obviously, and same with the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. There are a lot people that know a lot more than me. So maybe next year, if we get this started again, I can sort of, I can be the host, and then I can invite other guys to come with me and have a conversation. And just unpack, and it's not, and we also got theology teachers and ministry teachers and church history guys who can also provide a different perspective and angle to, and I can imagine that this can be also not just beneficial for our youth and our younger listeners and those who struggle with the language, but it can also act as a resource for Whiwhiaos too, who may be trying to find some sort of inspiration for their sermon on Sunday, and then they'll tune into the podcast and then think, oh, okay, yeah, that's good, blah, blah, blah. So I was thinking about that, going back to Malua, and hopefully we can sort of make that some official podcast for the college, and, I can sort of host and with others.
I hope so.
We'll see what happens.
And then also makes it lighter, right? Makes the load lighter, so it's not just, because everyone's busy, and it's not just you. You've got support from your colleagues and different perspectives. That would be so dope. That would be really cool.
if anything, if it doesn't happen that way, it'll still happen, just not on an official capacity.
From the down low.
But I'll still get people to come and say, hey, can you just appear on my, for a few minutes of your time? Turns into an hour. Nah, but yeah. I guess the other thing with the podcast, I didn't realize people were listening to it, and then they were asking me to go longer, and I was like, what? They felt like they wanted to hear more, and I was like,
and you were like, you want to hear my voice?
I know.
Sure. Let me record an hour and a half.
I'm like, I hate the sound of my voice. Whatever. Other people are hearing, it's just totally annoying. I mean, if my wife hears my voice, it's a lot about my voice. Eh?
But yeah, like most importantly is that you do have fans and people following, man. I was just like, how dare this guy just stop the podcast? Like, who does he think he is? Like, does he think he's just talking to himself? We're like logged in listening. Hello. But
it's funny because it's funny because I'm mainly on Twitter, and I only made the announcement on Twitter. And then the people that don't have Twitter who are listening, and they were going, hey, what happened to go? Oh, sorry, I just put on the announcement on Twitter because I don't like Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Are you on Facebook?
I am on Facebook, but I rarely
There's another personality on Facebook.
Yeah, I don't. That's why I like Twitter, because I can be myself on Twitter.
Let's talk about Twitter, right? Because look, I gotta read this, right? Because I'm not even joking. I want to talk about the diaspora, bro. I want to talk about the diaspora, but I went on Twitter before this interview, and I Googled Samoan diaspora, and you know what? I didn't Google. I searched on Twitter. I'm doing it right now. Yeah. I put in Samoan diaspora, and I was laughing my head off because you came up this idea that we don't live there, so we don't get a say. That we don't like. What are your thoughts on that? Because you see it all the time on Twitter, just this constant back and forth.
So it's a difficult one because it's quite clear that there's this sort of us and them mentality.
I hate that.
Which is kind of disappointing. Well, it's really disappointing because as Samoans, there is no us and them. We exist wherever we are because Samoa in Mautau of it. So what that means is that wherever we go, we represent our homes, our culture, our church, our land, our village. We represent everything that makes us Samoan. So this us and them mentality almost seems as if once we move away from Samoa, we're no longer Samoan.
Pause. I found it.
No, yeah.
What is this was 2018. This is 2018.
Yeah, it might have been ages ago.
Yeah, what is it? 2018 August, actually. What is it with this us and them mentality by our people back home in Samoa? ? Those Samoans in the diaspora left not because they stopped loving Samoa, but because they love their ainga. So when Samoans abroad speak about matters back home, stop rolling your eyes. #Maotatau Ave.
Oh.
Mic drop.
Shucks, that was a while ago.
Yeah, don't worry. That was 2018. And you're second from the top.
The second on the top.
on the search diaspora Samoa. Carry on. See?
Yeah, no. So that's my sort of disappointment about this us and them mentality and attitude. And man, what people don't understand, forget to understand, especially by our families back home, is that there are different types of tautua. There's tautua tuavai, which refers to the tautua on the land and all those different levels of tautua. But there's also tautua aitau malele. And tautua aitau malele refers to those who serve ainga and village from afar, whether it's on the next island, whether it's on from a different country. So there's a space for us to do tautua. So if there's a space for us to do tautua, then there's obviously a space for us to voice our opinions when it comes to matters of the heart. And matters of the heart is obviously whatever concerns Samoa. So I feel that that part of our identity is sort of being minimized by, not everyone back in home. It's only a couple of voices.
Just a group.
Loud on Twitter. Yeah, that's right. And then, for me, it's frustrating. And there's a lot of trying to justify that position, but I just feel that whatever justification they can come up with, there's still this tendency to minimize our identity and our birthright, because even though we're born and raised in these lands, our birthright is still Samoa. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense.
But it's in our blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we're Samoans, and we're still connected to the land, and the land is our birthright. So we have every right to speak on those matters. But how many characters is it on Twitter now that you're allowed to say? I don't think you can come up with a successful conversation on Twitter, weighing all the pros and cons and all that sort of stuff. So my way of dialogue when it comes to matters like that I would rather much prefer a face-to-face type of conversation or talanoa. And I think I'm waiting to return back to Samoa, and then I can sort of be the voice of in Samoa.
Yes.
And that way people can't say to me, oh, you can't talk. Like, hello, I'm here with you. But I have an element of my identity that I need to bring to the fore, because I represent those that are Aito Malili, that are existing on other lands. And you can't take away our birthright because of the fact that we're away from the homeland. And I feel that, man, it's frustrating to hear that voice from a lot of people.
Yeah, and
people are really influential on Twitter.
I was going to say, when you talk about I never engage because I don't know how to engage with some of these people. They're just so
you're on a different level of Diaspora.
But you know what? What's interesting, bro, is when you actually look up some of these people. Not that I'm looking them up a lot. There's a lot of privilege there. I mean, they're going off at the diaspora. They're like, don't talk about stuff that doesn't concern you. You don't even live on the land and all this stuff. But these people, these gatekeepers, they're almost from the elitist level of society. I mean, not all of them, but some of them, and it's super frustrating because they go on and on about Samoa. Like for me, I've said this before, when I get to Samoa, I'm not someone who stays at hotels and stuff. I don't do that. I don't eat it. I go and support businesses, but I love to go kua, love to stay. I love to listen to my aunt, just catch up with family. But a lot of these people that are like diaspora people, they're like diaspora shut up. They're like from real elite part of society. They're like they're probably what you consider the top 1%, and it's super frustrating.
And that's why I said, a lot of the justification they have is that they say that we don't contribute financially that much. And they come up with all these graphs and figures and all that, and I was like, I didn't even know we had those things. But a lot of the villages, the Guapeks, they'll tell you, so we play a big role in that. And that's our tautua from afar. That's our tautua Aito Malili. We contribute the best way we can. And one of the best ways we can contribute is by giving money and whatever we can from the contexts that we come from. So it's So, a lot of these people, that, that we're referring to, who shall remain nameless, are good friends of mine.
Yeah, they're your friends, bro. They're your
I would
friends.
rather not hit them up on Twitter about it. I'd rather just wait until I go back to Samoa and we can have a conversation. That's the best way. Like, tala noa happens in the face-to-face, context, in a platform. So yeah, I would much rather just have a face-to-face conversation with them and tell them, what that frustrates you about Samoans and diaspora. Why are you trying to be the whole gatekeeper and trying to minimize our existence? And yeah.
And I mean, don't get me wrong. I find that the back and forth, it's actually quite interesting. I just don't engage because might get dragged, and because these are the same people that talk about mental health, and then they're like online bullying other Samoans that don't agree with their perspectives. So I'm just like so scared. I just talk about what I talk about and just stay right away.
Yeah,
it's scary, bro.
Yeah, hard. Yeah, I think we'll just keep the peace for now. That's why, on Twitter, I was just like, I'm not going to engage anymore with that. I'm just gonna wait and just have a face-to-face with them. I mean, that's a better way of dealing with those type of issues.
I wait for that. I can't wait for that day to happen. I'm like, get him, Brian. Get him.
No, I'm not. Yeah, nah. I'm Kelia Kala Laku Voi,
what's happening in Sydney, bro? I was just watching the news this evening. Crazy stuff, man. What up to, Sydney? What's going on, man?
Man, it's frustrating, eh? Majority of Sydney siders are doing the right thing. It's just that minority that are just sort of failing to understand the reasons why these measures have been taken. And it's for the protection of the rest of society, especially those who are vulnerable, the elderly and those with compromised immune systems, those with breathing issues and things like that. So it's going to be, I mean, when people don't see that, it's a problem. And this whole talk about our freedoms, we're fighting for our freedom. I always ask, what freedom are you talking about? You not have a house, a roof over your head and food to eat, and are you actually being enslaved? What exactly are you talking about when you're referring to freedom? And it stemmed from all these conspiracies, right? Whether it's QAnon or these other types of movements, and a lot of evangelical Christians as well are guilty of that.
Oh, they're the worst, man. They're some crazy people out there.
Yeah, like I think one lady came with a sign saying that the blood of Jesus is my vaccine.
Oh my God, I know. I was just like, stop it right now.
Yeah, that was really disappointing. And they're very misinformed. And they tell you, it's telling you to be awake, look at the signs, blah, blah, blah. The governments are trying to control you. I mean, ironically, every government does that, but to control is in this case is to protect, because, there's a deadly virus going around. And we saw in the news that this 30-year-old who had no pre-existing conditions, she died from sadly from the COVID coronavirus, and it's from the Delta variant. So we need to check our privilege. I think that's the first and foremost thing we need to do. We need to check: are we are we experiencing the disadvantages and the sort of inconveniences that a lot of people are facing this virus, and if we're not, then we shouldn't be advocating for these ridiculous ideals and marching in the city compromising the lives of people, and also putting unnecessary pressure on the police force. And
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. So, my advice to people, especially my the Sydney side, is because I'm a Sydney person myself, is to just find patience, persevere through the lockdowns, because the lockdowns are necessary. I mean, they're not nice, but if you have the right attitude, then you can see that persistence through this can help us get to the other side. Yeah,
it's frustrating because how they get all these people together for these big marches, right? Like in Sydney. And then again, it just draws attention away from the real problems, like the Aboriginal people, the people of the land who are living in places that don't have access to healthcare, don't have access to the vaccinations and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? So it's check your privilege, because these people are on social media, and all the while we're forgetting about the marginalized communities and people who don't even have access to proper healthcare, to water, to resources during this time, right? So it's I've seen a lot of our people, Islanders, Samoans, sharing videos where there's this Karen. No, it's not a Karen. There's a dominant culture person speaking, and at first it's real sneaky, because at first this lady's speaking about, how am I going to support myself and da da da. If you listen right to the end, it eventually becomes this racial rant. Talking about people, it ends up being, who cares about the people who have health issues? Who cares? And people are sharing it. They just see something and they're sharing all this misinformation and all these rants. And it's like, come on, people, can we do better? If you continue to listen to the end, it just becomes this real racist rant. And she's going off at, people who are dying and stuff. And like, our people just need to do better. It's like, we had someone we know post up, why is the Australian government, making us pay for these PCR travel tests? And I was thinking, I was about to scream. I was like, too low. I was like, oh, Brian, I was thinking, have you been living under a rock for the past how many months? Like, where do you get off like posting this rubbish when you guys are openly partying and not wearing masks, not following rules? And that just our people, they're just so quick to post rubbish, and it's like, settle down. Seriously, think about it.
And see that, and that's the thing. Like, I know a few people that are anti-vaxxers, and I don't want to impose my belief about the necessity to vaccinate upon people who choose not to. I understand they have reasons, and some of them don't trust what's being put into their body. I get why people do make that decision, and but at the end of the day, there's an order in these lockdowns to stay home. So that's the least they could do, because by them not being not vaccinating, it affects. I mean, that's there within their circles, and it affects them. But when they go out like this, when there's already a lockdown being enforced, it's putting pressure on other people. You know what I mean? So when they're going out, they're sort of talking about their freedom and all that sort of stuff, but their very actions are compromising the freedom of others. So if they want to protect our rights and our freedoms, then the best way to do that is to stay home, because by staying home, you're protecting not just your own rights, but you're protecting the rights of everyone else. So you would think that would be a better approach to this question of freedom, that position that other people take. So it's and I've some of my other friends, they try to associate our Christian beliefs with this notion that it's imposing on their Christian beliefs, and which is kind of disappointing, because they have this mentality that science is against Christianity, but no, that's not it. A more better and alternative view is to view science in tandem with Christianity. A lot of what science has sort of researched and developed, it's life affirming. It assists with people's livelihood. Now, as a Christian, anything that's life affirming is according to God's will. So if science is life affirming, then obviously it's on the side of Christianity as well. But I don't get this whole mentality that science isn't on Christianity's side, when they're doing the very thing that Christianity seeks to achieve, is to enable others to live, right? But yeah, it has sort of various elements that just it complicates matters when people just come with that real right wing type of understanding of Christianity, and it's really upsetting.
Crazy times. Book recommendations, bro. What book recommendation do you have?
So I got this book at the moment, After Whiteness, by Willie James Jennings, and I've just started reading this because this was a gift to me from one of my good friends up in Sydney, Michael Mawson. He recommended this book, and at the conclusion of my thesis, I finally found on my thesis edits that I'm still working on, I found some time to pick it up and read. So I'm just looking at it now, and I'm thinking, oh wow, and so I'm up to page 10, and it's really good so far. Like I said, I only just started reading this, but
it's a start. It's a start. No judgments.
I can see why Mike recommended this to me, because it's such a good read, and I love the way he articulates. I'll just read a bit of the blurb at the back. After Whiteness is for anyone who has ever questioned why theological education still matters. It is a call for Christian intellectuals to engage isolation for intimacy and embrace their place in the crowd. Just like the crowd that followed Jesus and experienced his miracles, it is part memoir, part decolonial analysis, and part poetry. A multimodal discourse that deliberately transgresses boundaries, as Jennings hopes theological education will do too. So, a lot of this as well is talking about decentering whiteness in our discourse. And I know you do a lot of racial justice work in your own field, sis. So, I highly recommend this book, even though I haven't finished reading it. But I will get around to finish reading it because I have made progress. And it's so far so good.
Cool.
So check it out, guys.
I will. I look forward. I look forward to looking it up. Sounds a bit, technical for me, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna look it up and check it out for sure.
It sounds technical because of the blurb, but I think when you start reading it, it's got a very reflection type approach to the writing. So therefore, it's an easy read. Me anyway. And that's not saying much about me. That's just probably it's probably a preference for less complex books. I think this is a pretty good easy read.
Cool, bro. So we always end the podcast with some words of wisdom or some words of encouragement. Just not for our youth, for our Ifakasa youth, just for audience, anyone listening. Before I hand it over to you, I just, again, I'm just so grateful that I know you're busy. I know you're doing edits. I know you're trying to finish off your, the last few things on your papers there. But I appreciate you so much. We've been trying to do this podcast interview for a while now. you know, and I appreciate you taking the time out to do this. Like I said, you know, you're definitely, you know, you're a role model for our young, you know, our young people. You're someone who has, you know, like you said, lived in many different places. You've been on quite the journey. You have a story to tell. So thank you so much for coming through. I also just wanted to say, you know, throughout the interview, we kept mentioning your parents. Rest in love to your mum, which I forgot to mention earlier. You know, and I know that she was a big part. Like you said, you know, women play a big part in the ministry, and I know for sure that she was, you know, the backbone. You know, in regards to mum, you know, your dad's ministry and just the years of service that she gave to your church. You know, as you know, so much love to your family and dad, and you know, rest in peace to her. But I'll hand it over to you now. Yeah, take it away.
Thanks, sis. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on this wonderful podcast. Like I said, I've had so many good things about this. So, you know, it's been an honor to be part of this process and also to be part of your journey. Yeah, I just love conversing with you. I mean, you know, we've known each other for a long time, back in the MSN days. For those who don't know that the internet existed before.
We're like so hardcore, like I say. Yeah. We're like so hardcore ethics.
That's right. That's right.
You know. Yeah.
So yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful that we're still talking after all those many years ago. So pleasure's mine, sis. But you know, as a final word, I'm going to keep it simple, and what I'm going to say is, you know, especially to our youth, is to value time with family. You know, our parents, they're only here for a certain time. And, you know, just like the blink of an eye, you know, they were there, and then all of a sudden they're not there anymore. So my advice to all the young guys and all the youth is to really take time, appreciate that time with your families, to spend time with them. I know we like to spend time with our friends, and there's nothing wrong with that, and like to go party and all that, but make sure you spend an hour, at least an hour of your day, to sit with your mom or your dad and just talk to them, you know, whatever it is. It can be about anything. It can be about culture. It can be about family. It can be even about, you know, the Bible, whatever it is. But find that time within your day to spend with your family and value that. If COVID has taught us anything, it's taught us to value our time with families and to spend time with them, because, you know, the opportunity to spend time with them, you know, we just never know what will happen to our parents. And you know, and when you're in my position, you know, losing a parent, you know, you spend the rest of your days, you know, wishing that you could have spoken to them again, you know, to have that opportunity to talk with them again. Yeah, so I think that's my final word. You know, value your time with family, spend time with them. You know, it's because it's a place of love, it's a place of learning, and it's a place where you always feel safe. So that's my takeaway from this. Or I hope that's other people's takeaway from what I've just said. So yeah, spend time with your family and value it and cherish it.